Students, welcome to today's session on a massive open online course on international economics. Today, we are going to discuss comparative cost advantage and Ricardo. This is essentially module number 9, but if you remember that while discussing trade and gains from trade, I promised you something. I promised you that I'll come back with the idea of comparative cost advantage with great detail. And the entire session, entire module is going to be devoted on deciphering the idea of comparative cost advantage, which has been developed by David Ricardo, one very important and significant economist that shaped the idea of international trade. And the idea of comparative cost advantage is still very fascinating. And the recent development of international trade theory in particular, heavily depends on this idea of comparative cost advantage. Now, before I tell you what I did in my module 2, I want to tell you a very brief story regarding the relevance of comparative cost advantage theory and David Ricardo. One very famous economist, his name is Paul Samuelson, Nobel laureate. Students, you remember that a lot of issues, lot of ideas in economics are named after this person, Paul Samuelson. Even the Stolper-Samuelson theorem is named after Paul Samuelson. So once he is asked in a seminar, in economics, do you have anything that is very important and significant that without which this subject cannot stand? Paul Samuelson took a deep breath, took some time, maybe 1 minute or two, and he replied that there is one important thing in economics, in international trade, which is non-trivial. There is only one thing, which is comparative cost advantage and international trade. This lecture is going to explore few things, deliberate on few issues. One is failure of absolute cost advantage theory, and then using a numerical example, and then we move to comparative cost advantage, the basic idea. And while developing the model, I will talk about the assumptions, and as you recall that we have to define the production possibility frontiers for both the trading partners, that we will end and then conclude our session today. Now, the introduction or as the backdrop of this lecture on comparative cost advantage, very quickly let me just read out, and as and when required I will explore much on that. Comparative cost advantage theory, as you know, it is a reformed version of absolute cost advantage theory. When absolute cost advantage theory fails to explain the basis of trade, fails to explain the pattern of trade, fails to ensure that this kind of exchange can benefit both the trading partners, then comparative cost advantage theory give us a sufficient, reasonable and acceptable explanation to that phenomenon. And this theory, as I mentioned, was developed by the British economist David Ricardo. Ricardo's theory stated that, other things being equal, a country tends to specialize. Specialize means a country is going to focus on the production of that commodity, specialize in and export those commodities in production for which it has maximum comparative cost advantage. So I need to focus on two things. One is comparative cost advantage, the other is maximum. So if I am maximum efficient, the first thing is that efficient, and the second thing is a maximum efficient. So these two are very important dimensions. Or minimum comparative disadvantage. So you remember, students, I told you before in module 2 that I am less inefficient. So less inefficient means I am relatively efficient. So minimum comparative disadvantage is a kind of reflection or mirror image of less inefficiency. So I am essentially telling you the same thing, just the shapes are different. Similarly, the country's import will be of goods having relatively less comparative cost advantage or greater disadvantage. And this theory, based on this comparative cost advantage principle, the trade theory, is known as Ricardian theory. And as I said, it is a reformed version of absolute cost advantage theory. When absolute cost advantage fails to explain the basis of trade in a situation where country has absolute advantage in the production of both the goods. Absolute cost advantage theory, very quickly, students. Remember, this says what? That an exporting country must be able to produce a larger output with a given amount of factors of production than any rival. If it is, then I can say that I'm absolutely good. I'm good. I'm absolutely good. Just like I'm taller. I'm taller in absolute sense. But as long as I'm not saying I'm taller than Mr. X, essentially I'm going to tell you a half story, a half-baked cake. So I need to put the thing with which I'm comparing myself. So that is why this comparative cost advantage principle is much more reformed and acceptable version than the absolute cost advantage theory. But in absolute cost advantage theory, this is not realistic because there are many underdeveloped countries. You remember I told you before, many underdeveloped countries which do not possess absolute advantage in production of any commodity, and yet they have trade relations with others. The question is why? Because they are not efficient. They do not possess absolute advantage in any commodity compared to another country. In spite of that, they are producing something. But they should not, if I follow Adam Smith's idea. But still they are doing this. There must be some reason behind it. What is the reason? The reason is comparative cost advantage or relative cost advantage, and that's the building block of this Ricardian theory. Now, let's give you a very simple numerical example, but this example is very important. So students, you have to be careful while listening to this part. Because if you miss this part, you won't be able to follow what is going to come in next slides. So the point is that, let us assume that there are two goods, X and Y. Look at the table, students. This X and Y, these two goods are being produced by two countries, A and B. These two countries are having same amount of endowment. Endowment of what? Endowment of labor. The same amount of labor endowment is 100L and 100L. I have defined by this 100L. Now the point is that by using 100L, what I can do, what country A can do, or what country B can do. Look at the first row, rather instead of first it is second row. Country A, by using, I'm going slow because we have to be very careful and we have to be very sensitive while understanding all these concepts. By using 100 units of labor, country A can produce 120 units of X. Country A can produce 100 units of Y. What is the idea? Idea is that if I employ 100 units of labor only on X, at max I can produce 120 units of X. If I produce only Y, so I'm not producing any X, the maximum amount of Y I can produce, country A can produce by 100 units of labor is 100 units of Y. That's done for country A. Now come to country B. By using same amount of labor, country B can produce 80 units of X. If country B produces only Y, country B produces 90 units of Y. Just look at the figures, the numbers, it says what? Country A is efficient in both line of production, both X and Y. Because same labor can produce more X, because 120 is greater than 80, and more Y, because 100 is greater than 90. So absolute advantage theory says that country A has absolute advantage in both X and Y, and country B has nothing. Nothing means country B has no advantage, neither on X nor on Y. Now, the comparative cost advantage principle says that, look, what I need to sacrifice if I want to do something else. This is the very idea of opportunity cost. Just like if someone asks me to go for an alternative profession. So if someone asks me, don't leave this job and go for taxi driving. So what I'm going to do? I'm going to calculate the possible income from taxi driving at the income that I am losing if I leave this job. So this amount of money I am leaving or I am sacrificing the moment I leave this job, that's my opportunity cost. Because I am losing this opportunity, I am sacrificing this opportunity. And this is the opportunity of getting a job of taxi driver, and when I am sacrificing the job of my current thing. So this is the idea of opportunity cost, and Ricardian theory is based on such idea. Now, I am replicating the same thing in this diagram, in this example. So what if country A decides to produce X? So 120 units, or what if country A decides to produce Y? So 120 units of X has to be sacrificed if country A wants to produce 100 units of X. Or 120 units of X can be produced if country A sacrifices 100 units of Y. So 1 unit of X can be produced if country A sacrifices 100 by 120 units of Y. So essentially, this 0.83, students, look at this number. 0.83 unit of Y needs to be sacrificed if country A wants to produce 1 unit of X. Similarly, in order to produce X, country B has to sacrifice 90 by 80, means 1.125 unit of Y. Now students, just look at these two numbers. Country A needs to sacrifice 0.83 Y and country B needs to sacrifice 1.125 units of Y, just in order to produce 1 more unit of X. If I say so, then students, it becomes apparent to you that maybe country A is more efficient in producing X compared to country B. Remember that this is the word I used, who is not only efficient, who is more efficient. So if that is true, then perhaps country A should specialize in X, in spite of the issue that country A is absolutely efficient in both line of production. Country A should shun the production of Y, rather it should focus only on the production of X. Similarly for Y, you can see that country B has more efficiency in the production of Y. So here the comparison is between 1.2 and 0.88. Just you can apply the unitary method and you can come up with this idea. So this is called, this is not only how much labor is used to produce 1 unit of X. The comparison is between two countries. Not only between two countries, the comparison is between the relative requirement between X and Y in country A, relative requirement of labor in commodity X and Y in country B. So essentially it is the comparison of these two ratios between these two countries, but that was not the case in absolute cost advantage theory. So that's the refinement of absolute cost advantage theory, and it is based on the opportunity cost that I just said. So in numerical example what we had, there are the idea of opportunity cost. Lower opportunity cost wins. If I just go back, lower opportunity cost wins means 0.83 over 1.125. 0.83 wins means X is going to be produced by country A and Y is going to be produced by country B. Students, look, country A has comparative advantage in X and country B has comparative advantage in Y. Therefore, country A should specialize to produce and export X, while country B should specialize to produce commodity Y. So that should be the pattern of trade, and here the basis of trade is comparative cost advantage but not the absolute cost advantage theory. So that was essentially the basic idea of comparative cost advantage theory, but this is just by using a numerical example, because numerical example can give you a very rudimentary idea, but you need to go for a generalized kind of concept. This generalized kind of concept can be developed by using a formal model. We will discuss the formal model, but developing the formal model requires some assumptions. Assumption number 1, labor is the only scarce factor of production. So labor is the only factor of production which is scarce in supply. Because in economics, we essentially try to answer 3 basic questions: what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Because the resources used to produce something, anything, we need resources, and these resources are scarce. That is why we need to choose what we want to produce. So just like that definition, labor is also scarce in nature. So this is limited in amount in both the countries. So both the countries means we have 2 countries. In both these countries, amount of labor endowment are scarce. In a simplified version, we can assume that the labor endowment are same in both the countries. And the very important part of this assumption number 1 is that labor is perfectly immobile. Labor is perfectly immobile between countries, but labor is perfectly mobile between sectors. So within country, labor can move from this place to another place. In case of India, labor can easily move from West Bengal to Bihar, from Bihar to Uttar Pradesh, from Uttar Pradesh to Jharkhand, from Jharkhand to Himachal Pradesh, from Himachal Pradesh to Telangana. So there is no restriction on it. But the labor from West Bengal cannot easily move from India to America, to India to Finland, from India to Australia. So strict border control is there. So labor is perfectly immobile. You cannot move across nations, but you can move within the nation. All labor is homogeneous and all occupations pay same wages. I want to tell you one thing, students, that this Ricardian principle is essentially a reflection of productivity of labor. So this productivity of labor are same. So all the laborers can produce same amount of output given the option. And since they can produce same amount of output and their productivity are same, so they can easily be used for this commodity or that commodity, this service or that service. Their return should also be same irrespective of the sectors where they are employed. So they pay same wage. They are getting same wages from any sectors of a country. But I am not saying that across country is going to be equal. Whether that is going to be equal or not, that is altogether a different question. But I am not going to talk about that question at this moment. So in any occupation, the number of labor hours hired per unit of output neither rises nor falls, because real cost per unit of production, this is called per unit cost of production, which is constant, and that is why we will have a very famous kind of production possibility frontier that we will show in a moment. This is a straight line. And there are 2 countries, as I mentioned, and there are 2 goods. Goods could be A, B, goods could be X, Y. So it is 2 by 2 and 1 model. 2 countries, 2 goods, and there is 1 factor of production. The opportunity cost between the goods is constant in each country. Graphically, production possibility frontier is a straight line, which is what I just mentioned. And there is neither transaction cost nor transportation cost. You can question this assumption. You can argue that how can it be possible, but there is no harm in assuming that transportation cost is 0. And the important part, but at this moment it would be difficult for you to understand, but I want to mention that it follows constant returns to scale in both the sectors, because I mentioned that there are 2 goods, so 2 sectors. The firms are perfectly competitive. Essentially, not only the firms, the entire setup is perfectly competitive. Firms are competitive, goods market are competitive, factors market are competitive, so everything is competitive. And there is no restriction to trade, means there is no tariff, no quota, no restriction. Now, coming back to assumption number 9, this perfectly competitive assumption tells you what? Perfectly competitive assumption tells you that, At equilibrium, the price of the commodity should be equal to the cost of production. So the average cost of production is constant because the marginal cost of production would also be constant. Or at equilibrium, this price should be equal to the minimum of average cost of production, where it is constant in our case, which is constant in our case. So P, price of a commodity, should be exactly equal to the cost to produce that commodity. On the basis of this assumption, let us try to move ahead to formulate the model. There are two goods, X and Y, as I mentioned. There are two countries, home and foreign. Home is denoted by A and the foreign is denoted by B. Now, next four lines, these are very important. ALX is essentially the technological coefficient. This technological coefficient gives me what? How much labor is required to produce 1 unit of the good. So I'm telling you again and again, I'm repeating it. ALX means the amount of labor required to produce 1 unit of X. So if it is Aij, it is amount of ith factor required to produce 1 unit of jth commodity. And since there is nothing, no star, no F, nothing is written. So if nothing is written, that defines that it is for the home economy, and here my home economy is A. So ALX is the amount of labor, because labor is the only factor of production in our case. The amount of labor to produce 1 unit of X in country A. ALY is the amount of labor to produce 1 unit of Y in country A. Whereas ALX star and AY star, these two are the same thing. Same thing means amount of labor required to produce 1 unit of X in country B. Country B is my foreign country. And ALY is the amount of labor to produce 1 unit of Y in country B. Country B is the foreign country. Now, what I said is that labors are homogeneous. So irrespective of whether the labor is employed in X or in Y, it doesn't matter. The labor gets same return. Labor gets same wage rate, and the wage rate is here denoted by the W. So if W is the wage rate in home country, then the cost of producing 1 unit of X in home country will be W into ALX. Let me explain a bit on this. ALX, say ALX is 10. 10 means 10 labors is used to produce 1 unit of X. 1 labor gets W wage. 1 labor gets rupees 5 as the wage rate. So how much money I have spent to produce 1 unit of X? I have paid rupees 5 for each labor, and I have used 10 labors to produce the 1 unit commodity. So total cost should be equal to 10 labors multiplied by 5. So it should be rupees 50. So here my ALX is the labor requirement, and here my W is the rupees 5. So total cost to produce 1 unit of X is W into ALX. And what I said is that the market is perfectly competitive. So if the market is perfectly competitive, the cost of production should be equal to price. So this is the cost to produce 1 unit of X. So the price for producing price for X is PX, and in a competitive setup, these two should be equal. And similarly, for Y, the price of Y should be equal to W into ALY. And eventually, the ratio is PX by PY is equal to ALX by ALY. Why? Because you know PX is equal to ALX multiplied by W, and PY is equal to ALY multiplied by W. So cancelling out W from the numerator and the denominator, I have ALX by ALY. And the relative price of the commodities is determined by the marginal cost. If the technology improves means labor requirement to produce X and Y changes. So if that happens, then my ALX at this point of time and ALX at another point of time should be different. So the technological improvement case can also be incorporated in Ricardian model just by changing ALX, the value of ALX today and the value of ALX tomorrow or yesterday. But if for some reason I find that price of X that I am getting is more than the cost that I have incurred, so if for some reason Px by Py is greater than ALX by ALY, then naturally I should produce more X and I should not produce Y. So in that case, in this production of Y should stop and all the labors will be engaged in the production of X. So this is how the entire system operates, and the similar kind of argument can be made for foreign country. But whether foreign country will also have this kind of equality between these two countries, I mean with home country, that is not guaranteed, because foreign countries' price ratio should again be equal to their factor requirement ratio. If I just look back this slide, that the commodity price ratio is essentially equal to the factor requirement ratio. Similarly, in the foreign country, the commodity price ratio should also be equal to their factor requirement ratio. But there is no guarantee that the factor requirement ratio of country A should be equal to the factor requirement ratio of country B. In fact, they are not, because their labor may be more efficient in both and I may be less efficient in both or something else. But the point is that this difference in efficiency, this difference in productivity will essentially drive this trade possibility. This is the main driving force. So if that happens, the prices would also be different. Now, coming back to the production possibility frontier and use the concept that I developed before, is that if L bar is the total amount of labor endowment of a country, then total amount of Y that I can produce by using L bar is essentially L bar by ALY, and total amount of X that I can produce is essentially L bar by ALX. So the slope of this line is ALX by ALY. So this ALX by ALY is going to give me the slope of the production possibility frontier or marginal rate of product transformation. We can think of ALY by ALX, ALX by ALY. That depends on which commodity I am trying to transform or which commodity I am trying to produce. But the baseline is that the production possibility frontier is going to be a straight line for both the countries. Now, as I said, similarly, in foreign country, the production possibility frontier is also going to be a straight line, but the slopes must be different. This slope of this PPF should be equal to the price ratio. So for the home country, the price ratio is ALX by ALY, and for the foreign country, the price ratio is going to be ALX star by ALY star. If I compare these two diagrams, then what is apparent that the foreign PPF is steeper than the home PPF. If foreign PPF is steeper, means this AL star X star by ALY star should be equal to the price of X and price of Y in the foreign economy. And these price ratios should be higher compared to the home economy. Since the prices are different, there is ample scope for trade. So now, here what I assumed is that ALX star by ALY star is greater than ALX by ALY. So this means what? The labor requirement to produce X in foreign country compared to labor requirement to produce Y in foreign country, this ratio is greater than that of in the home country. So labor requirement to produce 1 unit of, if for the time being, if I assume that ALY and ALY star are same, then this inequality will be there if ALX star is greater than ALX. This means what? More labor is required to produce 1 unit of X in foreign. Relatively less labor is required to produce 1 unit of X at home. Therefore, what I can say is that foreign country should not produce X, because foreign country requires more labor. Means foreign labors are relatively unproductive. Foreign labors are relatively more inefficient in producing X compared to the home labor. So in that case, home labor should produce X, not the foreign country. If that is the case, then foreign country should produce Y, and Y should not be produced by the home country. This is for PPF for the home country, and this is the PPF for the foreign country. Now students, remember the same diagram that I drew, the same diagram that I explained while explaining gains from trade in module 2. So in post-trade situation, my price ratio is going to be the blue line. So if that is the case, if the horizontal axis measures X and the vertical axis measures Y, the home country should produce at this point, and the consumption might take place somewhere else, not on this yellow PPF. And for the foreign country, the consumption equilibrium will take place somewhere on the blue line, not on the yellow line. So there is again ample scope for gains from trade. We will definitely explain that phenomenon later on. So in today's lecture, what are the conclusion and takeaways for you students? A country can trade even if there is no absolute cost advantage for any of its commodity. Number one. So when absolute cost advantage fails, comparative cost advantage explains your trade pattern. Comparative cost advantage theory basically is an ability of an individual or a country to produce at a lower opportunity cost than its competitors. So the driving force is the opportunity cost. So that gives you the result. And we can see that A is completely specialized in X and B completely specializes in Y. A is completely specializing here and B is specializing here. And in a two-country, two-good, one-factor Ricardian model, specialization in each country's comparative advantage good can raise world output of both the goods. That can be explained by using numerical example and diagram. And by choosing an appropriate terms of trade, both countries can consume more. Since we are on a higher PPF, not PPF, we are on the same PPF, but we have the scope to trade along a relatively steeper or flatter price ratio. We can say that there is scope for gains from trade and relative to, so we can consume more of both the goods relative to autarky. That's nothing but the gains from trade proposition, which is also consistent with the idea of Ricardian comparative cost advantage. Thank you very much, students.